There is always some talk about how the top cores of DCI create an unlevel playing field for the other cores. Today, the validity of that comment can be debated, but what if I told you there was a time when that was the case? What if I told you that not only was it true, but that the top cores in the activity were actively and publicly trying to uproot the equality of DCI and give themselves an unfair advantage? This is the story of how the G7 tried to take control of Drum Corps and the corps that decided to call them out for it.
97.5, the Cavaliers! 98.125, with a score of 99.65.
All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
"2014 is a year that will go down in Drum Corps history. But to me, there was something that was even more striking than the nearly perfect score that Blue Devils received that year, or the insanely great show that was Tilt, and that was the Boston Crusaders." Before we talk about Boston's 2014 production, Animal Farm, it's important that we discuss who exactly the G7 was and why they are so important to the theme of Boston's show. Unfortunately, there is one man at the center of all of this. I'll just be referring to him as GH. Our story begins in May of 2010 at a board of directors meeting meant to discuss the future of DCI. It was here that GH gave a presentation on behalf of the top 7 corps. That presentation, titled the G7 Report, was a 66-page slideshow backed by the top 7 corps at the time. Those corps were the Blue Devils, Carolina Crown, the Cadets, the Cavaliers, Santa Clara Vanguard, the Bluecoats, and Phantom Regiment. In this report, they laid out the idea that the top corps are the reason that DCI is successful every year, and that because of that, those corps deserve to be financially compensated more than the other corps for pulling in more sales. Due to this fact, they decided that they wanted to see several changes put into place for the future of DCI. They decided not only should the top placing corps be compensated for their success, but they should also hold a greater vote and influence than the other corps. How would they decide what each corps' vote was worth? Well, they called for a reclassification of corps, calling them AAA, AA, and A. These designations would decide how much each corps' vote was worth, as well as how much each corps should be compensated for performing at shows. There were a lot more things that go into the full document, but I won't bore you too much about it. What you need to understand is that the G7, as they called themselves, thought they were more important than everyone else. Nearly everybody was against it, so it was shot down and the G7 were fairly quiet till 2013. In January of 2013, a letter was sent to the DCI voting membership on behalf of the G7 by GH. In this letter, they detailed the process that they would use to separate themselves from DCI if it was decreed that that's what was necessary. Their new company, entitled Music in Motion, was hosting 6 shows that year. Nowadays, we know these shows to be called Tour of Champions. Also included was a new offer on how the G7 thought that DCI should be run, requesting a return to the days of the top 12 as the board of directors of DCI. This new offer was largely laughed at by many corps directors and the leadership of DCI. Obviously, simple math shows that with 12 voting members, the top 7 would easily gain control of the entirety of DCI. This was viewed in the eyes of many as the final straw for the G7, and would set the perfect stage for Boston's new show, Animal Farm. The leadership at Boston Crusaders were fed up with the top groups pushing everyone else around. Boston in particular had many experiences with being treated as lesser than. While I cannot speak to the gossip that goes around when discussing Boston's experiences with being bullied by the top cores, I can mention a particular event in 2013 where Boston used baby powder to simulate an explosion on the field. After using this effect in Allentown with no issue, Boston received a penalty at prelims for, quote, leaving a residue on the field. This event will come into play later. Now let's talk about Animal Farm and why it was such a great story to reference the G7 and their attempted corruption of DCI. Boston made an effort to be extremely explicit with the idea behind the show theme. Obviously, the theme was Animal Farm, but overall, the theme was the G7. Before there was DCI, there was the Legion and the VFW. This is what ran Drum Corps at the time, and Drum Corps barely saw any money from it. It wasn't until all Drum Corps united to create what is now known as DCI that corps started to actually see some funds back from the shows that they performed at. Boston Crusaders was one of those founding members. DCI can be the representation of the animals taking over the farm, but the pigs are what corrupted that, and they represent the G7. Beyond their use of Animal Farm as a representation for the origin of DCI, Boston utilized 4 other Easter eggs through their show that I could find to bring across their explicitness of how they felt about the G7 situation. First off were guard silks that not only had the hoof and horn representation of the communist logo, but also had the DCI logo on the background. Then we have the G7 set, which you probably understand at this point in the video. Towards the end of the show, we get the last commandment of Animal Farm, retold for Drum Corps.
Drum Corps are created equal, but some are more equal than others.
And last we have the use of baby powder, seen at the beginning of the show on the drum major's podium, and then at the end of the show with the guard member taunting the audience by holding it up. Overall, the entirety of Boston's show was a slap to the face of DCI and the G7. To DCI for allowing the G7 to even maintain the idea that they were in control, and to the G7 for both ignoring the cores that built up the rest of DCI and believing that they were the only ones that were important to DCI as an organization. Animal Farm caused a lot of talk in the community, both for audiences enjoying the fact that Boston was calling out the G7 for what they really were, and there was a point of contention for the show that Animal Farm was. See, Animal Farm was a really hard show, and due to this, many believed that Boston suffered competitively for the hard show that they were given and not being able to accomplish it. This is true. However, I think there's something that a lot of people miss when discussing the fact that Boston had a hard show. Many blame the staff for giving the members a show that they could just not achieve. But that's only part of the story. See, the staff actually asked the members at the beginning of the season if they wanted to do an easy show and score well competitively, or if they wanted to do a hard show and be loved but score worse in finals. I'm sure you can guess what decision was made. In the end, while this show may not have done well competitively, it was an important telling of what should not be happening in DCI. And Boston would go on to be a premier group in the later years.
Now she must burn.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris, the creator of this video. First of all, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody that left supportive comments on my last video. I really appreciated it, and honestly, that video did so well, I couldn't even imagine that it would get to that point. Obviously, you're going to continue seeing content similar to this, and we're not only going to do drum corps history, we will do a few react videos, but my mindset has always been that the content related to drum corps on YouTube has never been that great. There's been some stuff that's really awesome, but most of it is just super repetitive. And my goal with these videos is to bring that baseline level of what drum corps content should be up. I hope to continue doing this, and I really appreciate that you guys actually liked the last video that I did. I hope you liked this video, and if you would like to see more content similar to this, please leave me a like, give me a subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.